Hey guys, welcome back. Today on The Untidy Artist, we're making cold process soap. Soap making is one of my absolute favorite hobbies, and I've been really excited to start my soap making tutorials. So before we get started, I do want to add that you'll want to make sure you have a basic understanding of the soap making process before you start a project like this. Soap making is a lot of fun, but you do work with lye, which is sodium hydroxide, and it can be a little dangerous, so you want to make sure that you are taking every safety precaution and that you do know exactly what you're doing and have a basic understanding of the soap making process before you take on a project like this. I am really excited for these tutorials, so with that said, let's make some soap. I will be posting the recipe for this tutorial in the comments below, as well as some very helpful links to different tutorials and blogs that helped me a lot in the beginning of my soap making journey. So make sure you check that out. You'll just need some basic supplies for this. The first thing that you're going to need is sodium hydroxide or lye. Now, I purchased this from a few different online soap supply places. I do know that you can find some at a local hardware store. You do want to make sure that it is 100% lye. You also want to make sure that you take all of the different precautions when using lye. You'll want to make sure you have goggles, gloves, a mask, protective clothing, and make sure that you're doing it in a room that's well ventilated. I like to do mine with my vent on in my kitchen with the window open. The next thing that we'll need is our oils. Now, I'm using pretty basic oils in this recipe. I wanted some that were easy to purchase at the grocery store. We'll be using olive oil, canola oil, which is also called rapeseed oil, and then I also have some coconut oil. Now, all of these different oils are going to do all different lovely things for our soap. You want to make sure that if you're using your own recipe, be sure to put it through a lye calculator. Now, you can use essential oils in your soap. Today, I will be using a fragrance from Nurture Soap Supplies. I love Nurture Soap, have loved all of their fragrance oils, and the one I'll be using today is called Fairy Garden. I have a little cup to measure my fragrance in, and then I have some flower petals. This part is completely optional, but I wanted to just make the top kind of pretty and sparkly, and we're not adding anything into the soap like swirls or colors, so I thought this would add a pop of color. So I have some blue cornflower petals that I got from Nurture Soap. I have some calendula flower petals, and I actually just got these at my local health food store. And then I also have some rose petals, and these are just crushed up rose buds and rose petals. I also got these at my local health food store. You can also find all of these online. And then to make it a little bit pretty and sparkly, because it will be a fairy soap, I'm using some Super Sparkles Mica from Nurture Soap. And this is just about the closest thing to fairy dust I can imagine. It's beautiful and sparkly, and we'll be putting some on the top of our soap. You will need a kitchen scale, and this is going to help us accurately measure all of our different ingredients. I have my trusty stick blender, and I would never recommend making soap without it. It just helps in mixing together your lye water and your oils. I also have a thermometer. A good old-fashioned candy thermometer will work. I have this little heat gun that is absolutely wonderful for measuring your different temperatures. I've got some different measuring cups, and I will actually be mixing my soap in this little paint container that I got from Lowe's hardware store. They're really inexpensive, and it just seems to work really well in mixing my soap. I have a spatula that I have dedicated only to making soap. I've got a little bamboo skewer and a spoon. And you'll want to make sure that anything you use for soap making, as far as spatulas and spoons, you want to make sure not to use in your kitchen again. I've got some paper towels and some 91% alcohol spray to spray on the top of our soap. And of course, I have my gloves. You never want to mix the lye up without gloves and a mask, and make sure you're in a ventilated area. And then I have a mold. I do have a hot process soap tutorial where I use a milk carton. For this tutorial, I'll be using a silicone mold that I purchased on Amazon, and I'll put a link for that below. And then I also have my recipe. Okay, first step is to measure out our lye. So I have my gloves on, and I'm going to take a little paper cup, and I'm going to zero out or tear my scale, and then I'm going to measure in the amount of sodium hydroxide that we need for this recipe. Now I've already figured this out in my little recipe with my lye calculator. I really like using the one from the Sage, and you'll want to make sure that this part is really accurate. So once I have my lye all measured out, I'm going to set that aside and zero out my scale again, grab my container that I'll be pouring my liquid into. And for this, we'll be using distilled water. You want to make sure that you're not using tap water when you're making soap. So I measure out my water, and then I'm going to carefully add my lye to my water, gently stirring as I go. And we want to make sure that we're stirring it completely until it has all dissolved. And so once it's all dissolved, I'm going to check the temperature, and it is very hot at this point. It's 177 degrees. We are aiming for anywhere from 100 to 125 degrees. I'm just referring back to my recipe here, and now we're going to measure out our oils. So the first oil we're measuring out is our coconut oil, and I need 7 ounces of the coconut oil. So I'm going to just measure it into this little measuring cup, and then I'm going to pop it in the microwave to melt it. Now you can also use a double boiler if you'd like. The goal is to melt down our coconut oil. And I'm going to set that aside, grab my bigger measuring cup, and I'm going to measure out my other oils. So the first one I'll be measuring out is my olive oil, and we will need 13 ounces of the olive oil. And once I have that all measured out, I'm going to pour it into the container that we'll be mixing our soap together with. And I like to make sure I scrape the sides of my measuring cup really well to get all of that oil out. And then I'll be measuring out my canola oil, and we'll be using 8 ounces of the canola oil. And I will go ahead and add that to my bowl as well. And then I'm going to grab my melted coconut oil and pour that in. And once I have them all nicely mixed together, I'm going to take a measurement of the temperature. And we actually are aiming for anywhere from 100 to 125 degrees for our oils as well. So I'm going to set my oils in the microwave for about a minute and just warm it up at short little intervals until it gets to the temperature that I want it to be. Then I'm going to grab my yummy Fairy Garden fragrance oil, and I will be using, I like my soaps to be quite scented, so I'll be using at about 6% in this recipe, which is 1.68 ounces. So I'm going to set that aside. I'm grabbing my glitter and my pretty little flower petals, and I'm going to take an extra bowl and just kind of mix a few of each of the petals into the bowl and just stir it up with my hands until I have a nice mixture of the colors. And then I'm going to grab my gorgeous sparkly glitter that reminds me of fairy dust, and I'm just going to sprinkle some over the top and coat all of those beautiful flower petals with the glitter. So now back to my oils. I've warmed them up. We're now at 100 degrees, and I'm going to check my lye, and my lye water is at about 107, so we're ready to mix these together. So I'm going to gently and carefully pour my lye water into my oils, and I like to pour it against the spoon, or you can even pour it against your stick blender. By pouring it slowly, you aren't creating as many bubbles, and I'm going to stir that with my little spatula a little bit, put in my stick blender, give it a good tap to get rid of all of the air bubbles, and I'm just going to turn it on in short bursts and begin mixing my soap. Now what we want to do is create trace, which means we're emulsifying together all of the oils and the lye water until it turns into a consistency that looks like pudding. And what will happen is when you pull up the stick blender and let the soap batter drizzle across the top of your soap, it should leave a little trail. Now before we add our fragrance oil, we want to make sure it's below the flash point of 200. So I checked my temperature of my soap mixture, and I was well below that. So I'm going to go ahead and pour in my fragrance oil, and instead of using the stick blender to stir this, we're going to use my little spatula. And then I'm going to go ahead, grab my mold that I already have sitting there prepared for me, pour about half of my soap mixture into my soap mold, and give it a good tap. Now this is going to get all of the air bubbles out of our soap, and then I'm going to go ahead and pour the rest of my soap mixture into my mold. And I like to spend a lot of time making sure I get all of that beautiful soap batter out of my container. So give it another good tap, and then I'm just going to use my bamboo skewer and a paper towel and kind of clean up the sides of my soap And it helps to clean as you go. I like using paper towels. It seems to be really easy, and I like just having a little stack of paper towels sitting to the side of me before I start making my soap so that they're easy to access. And once I have that all tapped down, I'm going to let it sit for just a minute so that it will begin to thicken up a little bit more, and then I'm going to take a spoon and we're just going to create some texture on the top of the soap. Now, this part is completely optional. At this point, you could actually just be completely finished with it and you would have a beautiful, amazing, lovely bar of handmade soap. But because I wasn't adding any swirls of colors, I wanted to do something a little fancy on the top. So I'm just taking the spoon and creating some texture, pushing the outer edges of the soap into the middle. Now I'm going to grab my beautiful little flower petal glitter mixture and just sprinkle it on the top of my soap. And this is just adding some really pretty pops of color, and it reminded me of what a fairy garden would look like. Lots of brightly colored flower petals with glitter, of course. And then I'm just going and sprinkling more glitter on the top because in my book you can't have too much glitter. Then I'm going to take my bamboo skewer and clean up the edges a little bit more. And this is what your gorgeous soap looks like. Now comes the part that is the waiting part, and I'm never very patient with this, but you'll want to set it aside and cover it up and let it sit overnight. I like to give mine a quick spritz with my 91% alcohol. This will help so that we don't get ash on the top of our soap. And once we have that done, make sure that your soap sets up completely. And I usually wait overnight. I'll unmold my soap and then I will cut it into pieces. Now, I invested in this beautiful little soap cutter that I absolutely adore. It's made my life so much easier when cutting soap, but a good old-fashioned knife will work just perfectly. Slice your soap into the sizes that you'd like, and that's it, guys. You're all set. You'll want to make sure you set your soap aside to cure for about 4 to 6 weeks, and then I like to check the pH balance of my soap. I really love how this fairy garden fragrance works in my soap. It's a very fresh, fruity, and a little bit floral fragrance. It's not overly sweet, and it reminds me exactly of what a fairy garden would be like. So thanks you guys so much for watching. If there are any soap videos you'd like to see or any comments or questions you have, please post all of that in the comments below. If you haven't already subscribed, please do. That would be awesome. And if you like this tutorial, give it a thumbs up, and we'll see you guys next time.